Welcome to The Explainer. Now, what if the world's most advanced blueprint for learning wasn't some modern invention, but actually an ancient one? Today, we're diving into the research of Dr. Sudhindra S.G., which explores an ancient Indian knowledge system that was less about religion and, well, more like a complete user manual for humanity. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to reframe what the Vedas actually are. Then, we'll journey back to a golden age of knowledge. We'll break down the 4 key pillars of learning, figure out how all this knowledge was unlocked, and finally, see how it all came together as a complete blueprint for life. So, first things first, we really need to tackle a pretty fundamental and very common misunderstanding about the entire foundation of this system. You know, when you hear that word, Vedas, what's the first thing that pops into your head? For a lot of people, it's immediately connected to religion, or maybe a specific community, right? Well, according to Dr. Sudhindra C.G.'s research, that common view kind of misses the original point. The research reframes the Vedas not as religious texts, but as the world's oldest, most structured education system. So try to think of them less like holy books and more like a detailed user manual designed for any human being, anywhere on the planet. Now, to really understand this system in its pure, original form, we have to go back in time. We need to look at a very specific and relatively peaceful period of history before its core ideas ever got watered down. To see the system as it was truly designed, the research zeroes in on the era before 1080 AD. Now, you might be wondering, why that specific cutoff date? Well, it's because this was before a series of foreign invasions began, which, according to the source, started to dilute these core principles and really shifted the whole societal structure. And look, this isn't just an internal claim. This idea is actually backed up by outside observers of the time. The great Islamic scholar al-Biruni, writing way back in 1017 AD, explicitly called India the global hub of knowledge, the center of world learning during this golden age. So, what was the secret sauce? What exactly made this system so powerful and so famous around the world? Well, it all starts with the 4 core pillars of knowledge, the 4 Vedas themselves. What's so fascinating here is that each Veda had a very distinct educational job. The Rig Veda, for instance, wasn't mainly for prayer. Its purpose was to teach and cultivate gratitude for nature. The Yajur Veda taught the science of conservation, how to preserve resources. The Atharva Veda was basically a guide to human psychology and building productive daily habits. And the Saama Veda, that was the secret ingredient that made the whole thing work. I mean, just look at this number. When you add it all up, the 4 Vedas contain over 20,000 verses of dense, complex knowledge. That is just a staggering amount of information. And that, of course, brings us to the most obvious question. How in the world was it humanly possible for a student, by just 15 years old, to commit all of this, all 20,000 plus verses, to memory? The answer lies in the absolute genius of the Samaveda. This wasn't just music for entertainment. It was a highly sophisticated science of memory enhancement. By setting the verses to very specific rhythms and chants, it literally created and strengthened neural pathways in the brain. It made recalling thousands of verses an automatic, almost effortless process. Okay, but memorization, that was just the key to get into the library. It wasn't the library itself. True learning, real understanding, required something more. For that, the system used this brilliant, multi-layered method to unlock the knowledge coded into every single verse. So, a student would take every single verse and analyze it through these 4 different layers. The goal wasn't to find one single correct answer. The whole point was to build mental flexibility. It was a process designed to create these incredibly versatile, critical thinkers who could solve any problem from multiple angles. To make this a bit easier to get our heads around, let's use a modern analogy from the research. Imagine a Vedic verse is like that famous formula E = mc squared. The very first layer, Aranyaka, is just about defining the terms. It tells you E is energy, M is mass, C is the speed of light. That's it. Simple definitions. But then you get to the next layer, Brahmana, and this is where the real magic happens. This perspective shows how that one single formula can be applied in completely different situations. How would a rocket scientist use it? What about a cricketer thinking about kinetic energy? Or even a dietitian applying similar principles? It's all about flexible, real-world application. And students weren't just thrown into this empty-handed. To help them with this whole interpretation process, they were given 6 powerful toolkits called the Vedangas.
And these were whole other disciplines, covering everything from the science of pronunciation and grammar to the rhythm of speech, and even astronomy for things like creating calendars.
And this is where you can see how the entire system was so brilliantly designed to expand outwards, from that foundational knowledge into practical, real-world disciplines that touched every single part of life. So branching out from the core Vedas were the Upavedas, which, you can basically think of them as the applied sciences. This included Ayurveda, the science of medicine and health, Gandharva Veda for the arts and music, Dhanu Veda, the science of defense and weaponry, and Arthashastra, which covered business, economics, and how to run a state. So the really crucial takeaway from Dr. Sudhandra's research is this. This was not a system of just abstract philosophy. It was a comprehensive, incredibly practical curriculum designed to equip a person for every single aspect of a productive and a meaningful life. And all of this leaves us with a final, and I think a pretty provocative thought. By studying this ancient blueprint, with its focus on gratitude, conservation, the science of memory, and this multi-layered problem-solving, what can we, especially those of us who are teachers and educators, learn from it to build a more complete and effective education for the challenges we face today?